Welcome to all of you to this second of the session 3. We had an interesting session earlier yesterday afternoon where we had a look at language, literature, and creative arts. The papers presented there looked quite a bit on the literature as well as how post-colonial literature has been affected or in a way influenced by the colonists, as well as what the post-colonial literature looks at the use of language, the colonial language in that sense, when they have to share their views or they have to share the voices of the oppressed. We also had papers which looked at theater and how a possible way or an avenue for presenting the Girmitia voices could be through the theater itself. Now, this is a continuation of the session, and in Fiji, it is already midnight, which means we have begun a new day, and it is the Independence Day of Fiji. So, a warm greetings from Fiji. And you would still be a day behind us. So for you, it would still be late evening or afternoon in your own countries. So again, we are going to look at language, literature, and creative arts. And of course, as we all know, we have one thing in common, which is looking at the Girmitia language itself. What form of Hindi, what form of language are we actually using, which actually, in a way unites us all. Literature. Again, the diasporic literature has its own place, and there are so many diasporic literature. It is not just Girmit. The other diasporic communities also share similar stories that we, the Girmit, have. Creative arts in its own form, whether it is painting, theater, song, music, films, quite a lot of those also have things that bind us. So in this session today, we are going to look at papers by various renowned scholars in diaspora, especially in Indian diaspora, from Trinidad, Australia, India, Mauritius. Unfortunately, we were supposed to have a presenter from South Africa, but she sends her apologies. So before we begin, I would just let you know that we will have the presentations from each one of you, let's say 15 minutes each. And the participants or the audience can actually share their chats or questions in the question and answer room or in the chats. However, what we will do is we won't have questions straight after your presentation. At the end, we will have a general discussion and summing up of the session. And that's the time we will ask each of you to actually share their view or audience to have some questions for you. So let's begin the presentations today. And the first one that we have is by Gopinath, Dr. Gopinath Gooptar, who is going to look at the Bollywoodization of the Indian diaspora, identity in Hindi films. And he is from NCIC, University of West Indies, Trinidad and Tobago. I welcome you, sir. You can have a session.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Rajni Chand. It's Primnath Gooptar, not Gopinath. It's Primnath Gooptar. All right, so can I share the screen again? Good. So thank you very much for that introduction. Are you hearing me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Yes,
okay, good.
Yes.
Right. So taking the cue from what our chair just said, in fact, I'll be looking at what links the Indian diaspora together. And one of the things I found that was a main linkage among the diaspora countries was the Bollywood movies. So my topic is the Bollywoodization of the Indian diaspora, identity and Hindi films. How has Bollywood films impacted on the descendants of the indentured immigrants living in these diaspora countries, and how it has impacted on their identity? So that is the gist of what I'll be talking about. And the thing about it is that I have done interviews with people. So it's ongoing research. And I've done interviews with people from Mauritius, South Africa, Fiji, Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago. So much of what I'll be saying is pulled from those interviews that I did with people from the various parts of the diaspora. So I won't spend long on these slides because I want to get to the end where we can have some discussions on that later. But we all know that Indian indentureship started over 186 years ago. People went to Mauritius, where the first big experiment started. That was a very successful thing. And it was so successful that the British decided to expand, and Indian immigrants went to Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad, South Africa, Fiji, Guadeloupe, Reunion, Martinique, and so many other countries, smaller countries in the Caribbean like Grenada, Barbados, and so on. And most of these people came from areas such as Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Punjab, Bengal, and other areas of India. The people who went to all these, the Indian immigrants who went to these countries, they were supposed to return to their country after 5 years of indentureship, or 10 years in some cases. But my research shows that almost 75% of them decided to remain in the land where they were domiciled, and they eventually lived there, and their descendants continue to live there, and they've spread into the other areas of the diaspora in areas such as Canada, England, Holland, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. So they've also, their children have remigrated and gone to those areas. But there was a second wave of migration from India, and this was the free migrants who went to areas as traders, and so on, especially with the removal of immigration restrictions in America and other countries. The Indian diaspora comprises of roughly 25 million persons in 170 countries. But if we add the gypsies to that, the gypsies originally came from India, we get about 30 to 35 million people in the Indian diaspora living all over. And a lot of trade take place with India. And one of the biggest items of trade with India is Bollywood. Bollywood has been the biggest item of trade with the diaspora countries from India. So 78 years after the first group of Indians left India, there were no Indian movies at that time. Indian movies came on stream in 1912 with the first Indian movie called Palki. But those were silent movies, and by 1931, music was introduced, or sound was introduced into Indian movies. And that was a big hit because the Indian audience loved music so much in all the shows and so on. That became a big hit. And that is what made a big difference in the diaspora countries. So the music and the songs in the Alam era changed the face of Indian cinema and ushered in a new era that is still with us today. The Indian producers, they loved Indian songs so much. The audiences loved it so much. They went overboard. And in one Indian movie, there were 71 songs. And that movie was Indar Sabha in 1937. And it's still a record that still stands today. So that's to tell you how songs and dances, and that's to tell you how the songs and dances became so important to Indian movies. It became the mainstay of Indian cinema, and subsequently, as we shall see later, it became the most prevalent aspect of Indian culture in the original diaspora countries like Trinidad, Guyana, Suriname, Mauritius, Fiji, and so many other places. So almost 100 years after the first Indian indentured immigrants left India for the colonies, Indian movies followed that route, bringing with them a slice of India. Now, when they came the first time, they brought with them a slice of India, but that was the what you call the folk traditions, the religion, the original culture of India that they brought with them, in the form of songs, music, dances, religion, language, and so on. But and of course, they had, because of that, they had the sitar, the Indian instruments, the songs, the dances, Raja Harishchandra dances, and so on with them. And they protected that culture that they had brought with them. They protected it as if it was in a box, and they didn't allow any changes to take place. But because they didn't allow any changes to take place, they began a certain type of calcification within the culture, because nothing new was added. And then they were fighting against westernization on other inputs in terms of their culture. By the 1930s, this slice of India that they had brought with them began to wane under the pressure of westernization and Christian aggressiveness. And of course, I said they faced calcification. And some of the younger generation began to buckle under that and began to adapt to westernization and so on. But then came Indian movies, and that changed things. So they were, we have to remember that they were completely cut off from India, and they had lost their links with India, and the only link was people who were coming like traders and so on. But they tried their best to maintain their identity and keep their culture alive, and they kept it as much as possible intact. And as they became freed from their indentureship, they created their own villages, and they created it in their own likenesses of an imagined India, the India that they remembered in their memory. So they were trying to keep their identity alive, and anything that reminded them of India became very important to them. Thus, in the late 1920s and beyond, the slice of India that followed the immigrants to their culture was different. The new slice that they brought, that came, comprised songs, music, dances, and so on, and which they saw as representing India. When they saw the Indian movies for the first time, they thought what they were seeing there was India, was real India, and they accepted that. But in truth and in fact, it was a celluloid India. It was not the real India. It was a make-believe India. It was India in a real, RWL. So the India that they mistook, that they saw in the films, they fell for it hook, line, and sinker. But that was a celluloid culture, and they consumed that, very, very much. But to them, this new side of India represented the imagined India, that India that they had lost, that India, and they saw it as that new link with India, a link that they had yearned for, a link that they wanted to keep intact. So unlike the India that they had kept alive, this new link actually brought India to them on a screen, and they could actually see on the silver screen. These are places that they had heard about in the Ramayana and so many other places that they had heard about, and they grasped it, like a man drowning. That reconnection came to life through films, and they saw the places like in stories that they had heard about the Rajas and Ranis, places in the Ramayana and so on. When they heard people speaking Hindi, that was an aha thing for them. That was an identity thing for them. When they saw people dressed in similar clothing that they wore, that was identity for them. When they saw people playing instruments on the Indian screen, that was identity for them. When they saw people using the tools that they knew, the things like the chulha, the jata, and so on, that was identity for them. So, and that kind of give them what we call the aha experience. They no longer felt ostracized because they were seeing people like them, just like themselves, and that for them was identity. For the first time, they were seeing people like themselves, and they got that aha. They were no longer lost. That identity matched their lost homeland, and it was brought to them on the silver screen. This reinvigorated them, and many of the traditions that they kept alive among themselves gave them added impetus to continue to keep alive, protect and develop and promote their culture and religion, which they had brought from India. But as I said before, the things like the chulha, the caste system, the jata, and so on, when they saw it in the films, it became important to them. But when the Indian movies were first shown in the diaspora countries, most of the people went to see them, not because of the songs, the music, the stars, or anything. They went to see it because it was an identity thing. They went to see it because it was an Indian movie. They went because that came from India. It was a link with India for them. As Indian movies continued to be shown locally and in their various diaspora countries, they went to see it because of the songs were beginning to become very catchy, very rhythmic. They was full of emotional melody. So from an identity thing, they began to latch on to the songs and music, to the stars and so on. So there was a new attachment to Indian movies and to its spin-offs, songs, music, dances. And this is what made a lot of difference to their culture. They actually took those songs, dances, and music and so on, and made it part of their culture. They hummed it every day. It became part of their life, and so on. East Indians in the colonies were so attracted to the songs, music, and dances from the movies that in time, by the 1950s, filmy songs, music, and dances had become the mainstay of their cultural offerings. In addition, East Indians in the diaspora largely began to mimic what they saw in the Indian movies in terms of the songs. So they began to mimic it, and at weddings and everything else, they would begin to sing these songs wherever they had a chance, the reels and so on. They were beginning gradually to replace the folk songs with these filmy songs. In Trinidad and Guyana, and to some extent Suriname, the advent of the mic men and Indian orchestras and radio from the 1940s popularized Indian film songs throughout the communities. Perhaps the same thing also happened in a number of the other diaspora countries. So the mimicry of these songs, they had to create orchestras, Indian orchestras, and these singers, they had to sing a song just as Mohammed Rafi or Mukesh or Lata Mangeshkar. They had to try to sound just like them, and the people loved it and they lapped it up, and that eventually became transformed and became part of their culture. I might say that in India itself, the Indian government was totally against Indian songs on the radio and making it part of the Indian culture. So by 1953, they had banned all Indian film songs from the Doordarshan radio because the culture people were saying that is not Indian culture. So, but in the diaspora countries, they took it and made it part of their culture. So in addition, many young East Indians mimic the hairstyles, the morph, the dress, the makeup, and so many other things about what they saw in the Indian movies. And all of these things, in a way, was identity issues for them because they were dressing like Rajesh Khanna or Dilip Kumar or Vijayantimala. They wanted to walk like them, dress like them, the same hair comb and so on. So that's one aspect of it. But then the Indian songs also began, the film songs began to impact on religion and religious settings. So the filmy bhajans became an important part of their life, and that also became important to them. So in Ramayana yagnas, pujas, weddings, etc., the film songs also began to take over there also. So during the extended reading of the 9-night Ramayana, filmy bhajans were rendered each night during the thing. And people wanted to hear these bhajans rather than the traditional classical song or long and boring, which they considered long and boring. They wanted to hear these catchy film songs, whether it was filmy religious songs or non-religious songs. So some filmy bhajans have been conscripted and it became part of the religious proceedings. And till today, when people hear some of these songs, they don't even realize that some of the bhajans, some of the most popular bhajans are from films. So in Trinidad, for example, this particular bhajan, Bhagavata Bhagavan Ki Hai Arati, that goes like this, Bhagavata Bhagavan Ki Hai Arati, that became, that was taken from a film, Bhagavat Mahima, and it became an Arati bhajan that was sung at the beginning and end of every Bhagavad Yagna that was held in Trinidad in 1950s, 60s, 70s, going into the 80s, and even until today, it is still sung. So that is an instance of where the filmy bhajan became so important to the religion outside of India. To Filmy songs, dress, and dances have also impacted on Diwali and Diwali Nagar, Pagwa, Ram Leela, in Sapab. I won't go into those areas, but it's a big thing whenever a song has to be played or sung during Pagwa or during Ram Leela and so on. People want to hear the filmy versions of it, the filmy songs. So at public events, even events that are organized by government or state agencies, when they have to put on an Indian item, they prefer to put on a Bollywood dance, a Bollywood song, or so on, rather than a traditional folk song or folk dance or something like that. So gradually, Indian film songs, dances, and so on became the means of these cultural offerings. And the important thing I want to point out here is that they began to gradually push into the background the traditional aspects of the culture, that first slice of India that the Indian immigrants had brought to them. They pushed it into the background, and it became the new kid on the block, sitting there and as being the new star boy. In several instances, within 2 decades, this new slice of India, the celluloid India, had effectively replaced the original traditional slice of India. But this celluloid culture was not seen as Indian culture in the diaspora, in some of the diaspora countries. And there were some people who fought against it, but they couldn't really fight much against it, and they had to eventually give up. So while in the diaspora countries, they made the filmic culture part of their culture. In India, officialdom did not recognize this as part of Indian culture. But it was very popular in the homeland and threatened to destabilize the Indian culture in a similar manner to what was happening in the diaspora countries. So the government officials, as I said, by 1952 or 53, they had banned it from the Doordarshan and so on. By 1958, they relented and they created a new station, Vivid Bharati, just to satisfy the needs of because the Indians began to tune into Radio Ceylon to get their Indian songs, and Doordarshan suffered a great deal for that. Although diaspora Indians live in a globalized economy, I move on very quickly now. They live in a globalized economy today. They live in a global village, but they look to India for their cultural sustenance. And that's important to remember, because their cultural links to India, many of them established their own cultural networks through the temple contacts, through Indian movie linkages, through whatever situation they have. They create these contacts to keep alive their linkages. To the Indian diaspora Indians, Indian movies are regarded as cultural ambassadors, linkages which culminate in a degree of convergence that contextualizes their presence in the diaspora. Most of the estimated 25 million diaspora Indians are linked together by Indian movies as if they were not separated by state borders or oceans. The popularity of Indian movies in the diaspora caused the blurring of boundaries in the globalized Indian diaspora setting. This has been brought about through technological advancements such as access to the internet, computer ownership, high-end cell phones, and other gadgets. Thus, the average diaspora Indian could be anywhere in the world and still have a huge slice of India with him right on his lap in his home. He could review the latest Indian movies, read any magazine, do anything he wants, and so on. So Indians overseas today, they live in a kind of borderless Indian transnational Bollywood state, a deterritorialized, non-geographic state that while it is global in its setting, it is sustained mainly by the flow of movies from India. It is clear, therefore, that the transnational dialogue rests on the major pillar of Bollywood films and its spin-offs products such as songs, music, dances, clothing, jewelry, cuisine, and so on. The Bollywoodization of the Indian diaspora has in some ways therefore created a kind of borderless overseas Indian state that is made up of disparate communities in the diaspora countries in the global community that is linked primarily by the Indian movie, the largest cultural export of India in the global world since Indian independence. It does not matter how far East Indians live from each other or what part of the globe they live in. They are linked, they are likely to be connected to one another through the Bollywood movies. It portrays a sort of fun, and it's because Indian movies, it cater to every kind of, to every Indian, regardless of what state they're from. It portrays a sort of pan-Indian value system that finds favor with all diaspora Indians, regardless of caste, color, religion, regional origin, language, or other divisive elements. And that's one of the great things about the Bollywood movies. It always tries to create that value system for Indians. This transnational borderless state have come to symbolize Indianness, and wherever Indians are, through Indian movies on social media, they are connected. My findings are quickly now. Bollywood movies have become...
Dr. Saab, I think we'll have to end that session here. And if there are anything more to add, we can have during the discussions later. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Primnath Gooptar, for your interesting session on how Bollywood has actually influenced the Indian diaspora. And even in Fiji, I would say the influence is there in everything that we see around us. And the recent influence, I would say, is from the TV series that we find. And it is a very interesting view when we actually have a look at what is portrayed in the TV series, which is totally different from the way the movies are. So it would be interesting to share more views on this later when we have the question and answer sessions at the end. Thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to more discussions on it later. The next presenter, Professor Vijay Mishra, has sent his apologies. He's unwell, so he won't be joining us. So instead, we will move to the next presenter, who is Yatinkumar Teraiya. Are you ready for your session? And Yatinkumar is going to talk to us about abolishing slavery of vulnerable Africans by Indian Gujarati traders, identity and humanity in Ganvantari Archery's novel Darya Lal. So we have someone who is going to talk about the Gujarati language novelist and how the abolition of slavery was in the African's context. Thank you. You have the session, all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Am I audible? Okay. First of all, happy Independence Day to Guruji, ma'am, to all members. Okay. The title of my paper is Abolishing Slavery of Vulnerable Africans by Indian Gujarati Traders, Identity and Humanity in Gunwantrai Acharya's novel, Darya Lal. It is like that. Gunwantrai Popatlal Acharya, the full name of the novelist, so from 1900 to 1965, the most prominent Indian novelist, dramatist, essayist, and journalist of 20th century who enriched the Indian literature of Gujarati language by his literary endeavors. In the 4th and 5th decades of the 20th century, the large numbers of readers were attracted towards his historical and postal narrations. All the historical sources which he discussed in his fictions are related to the real-life historical events which he mentioned in his respective fictions, either in the introduction or as a reference at last. Darya Lal. About Darya Lal. Darya Lal was published in 1938, is one of the such most famous and popular books. However, it is very difficult to translate the title in the English from Gujarat. It was a very difficult task for me to just translate the title of the novel from Gujarati to English, but I have just tried. So we can say like that, the son of the sea. But in the novel, the title not only represents the protagonist, but to the entire community. the Indians who are living in the Africa. Moreover, the title doesn't work as a noun only, but symbol, metaphor, adjective, and adverb for the nature and lifestyle of particular Indian community who are related to the sea, directly or indirectly. The major thematic preoccupation of the novel is to abolishing the slavery system and slavery trades from the Africa in the 17th century and to pass the message of universal brotherhood, love, compassion, sympathy, unity, equality, identity, human rights, justice, and major factors related to the humanity and the universal justice, which appeals to not only one religion, nation, or region or community, but to the entire human being of the world, which can be rightly defined through the following Sanskrit sloka, which says, it's like that. Ayam nija paroveti, ganana lagu chetasam, udar charitanam tu vasudhaiv kutumbakam. It is a very famous sloka. It is the feeling like that all the human beings on the earth are one of my family members, and I feel towards them like same as I do with my family. The novel has very artistic structure. It is divided in 27 chapters, and all the chapters have their own title. It records the historical movements of the migrations of Indians who are from Gujarat, especially from the Saurashtra and Kutch. As we know, the state Gujarat has long seashore, around 1,600 kilometers. Gujarati traders migrated to African continent for the business, established their trade empires, and settled there more than 100 years before colonials for Europeans entered in the Africa. Ramjiva is the one of the such migrants and protagonist of the novel who works with the company of Jairam Shivji. The company is one of the established companies in Africa by the Indians. The chief business of this company is to export the slaves from the Africa to the different parts of the world where they will be sold in the markets of slaves. Ramjiva is mastering capturing and trapping the vulnerable Africans from the dark and thick African jungle. The seasonal business of the slave of this company of Jairam Shivji was more than 10 lakhs, and it was the time of the beginning of the 17th century Africa. Ramjiva was sympathiless towards Africans, and he did not consider them equal to the human beings. He always treated them as animals or slaves, but one incident changed him. Once Ramjiva and his team captured 20 African men and women, and they were taking them to the company. They all were so tightly tied with each other with chain that they are unable to escape. But then the tragedy happened. One horned killed 19 innocent human beings. Only one was succeeding to escape from there, but he disturbed mentally. The 19 vulnerable Africans were helpless and unable to escape, or they found the way of survival because of the tight chain. Ramjiva saw this incident. He saw the dance of death of 19 innocent human beings and felt that the responsible person of the death of these 19 innocent human beings is not other than he himself. He changed it totally, and he doesn't consider vulnerable Africans as slaves or objects, but now he started to accept them as their family members or as human beings. He has now enough courage to make understand the company chief, Ladhaba, who is the head not only of the company of Jairam Shivji, but he has earned the respect of being the head of the family members of all Gujarati migrants. Ramjiva once declares his resolution. My resolution is that I am taking vow to abolish the trades of human slavery from its roots in the Jangabar, Africa. Ramjiva feels that what will be the difference between us and wild animals if we treat other human beings like slaves, sympathyless, compassionless. The resolution of the protagonist reminds me the famous line from the Rig Veda. Krunavantu Vishwam Arya. It means the entire world will be cultured by me. It means, first of all, I will change myself, then I will start to teach and preach to the world. So Ramjiva does the same. He starts living among the natives and tries to capture and tries to culture them. He encourages them for farming of clothes to be economically independent. However, he proposes to the Ladaba that if we will give you the clothes of same price as of the captured vulnerable African slaves, will you release them? Ladaba accepts his proposal and promises him to help him to do the same agreements with other companies. He continues with his noble deeds. By the recommendations of Ladaba, once Ramjiva helps East India Company to find their officer from the thick jungle of Africa. Once, including Ladaba, all migrants come to know that one Indian woman is captured by the pirate Abu. In the leadership of Ramjiva, they make her free from the pirates. Now, this incident makes everyone to feel like Ramjiva towards the vulnerable Africans, and company of Jairam Shivji decide that they will stop the business of slaves and they release all the slaves. Ramjiva completed his war and he succeeded in raising humanity in other Indian migrants. Chandrakant Bakshi writes in his Mahajati Gujarati, 1971, a non-fictional work. It is impossible to write about this community in 5 pages or 500 pages. I feel the same like Chandrakant Bakshi. I am concluding my talk with that. We can say the novel Daryalal is an example of equality, unity, love, compassion, identity, social justice, sympathy, and universal brotherhood towards not only to the vulnerable citizens of Africa, but the entire world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yatinkumar. I would say Uttam Che. It was a very enlightening look at the work, and I could see similarities between what Gandhiji actually felt when he was in South Africa. So the novel, I think, has quite a lot of connection between what Ramji did as well as what would have actually been the beliefs or the feeling that Gandhiji had when he was in South Africa. An excellent piece, and we definitely look forward to more discussions at the end of the session. The next presentation that we have is by Anisha Badal-Caussy. I hope I am pronouncing your name correctly. And
no, actually, my name is Anisha Badal-Caussy.
Anisha Badal-Caussy.
Yes.
Right? Okay. And Anisha hails from Mauritius. And definitely the French connection I can see in the title as well. And she's coming to talk about the literature of the Coups, specializing in Chorobolis Coupes d'Azur. Have I said it correctly?
Chorobolis Coupes d'Azur. Actually, it's about the female indentured laborer, Coupes.
Okay.
And d'Azur means the blue sky.
The blue sky, yes. Okay.
Yes.
So go ahead, and we look forward to hearing from you, Anisha. All yours.
Okay, I guess there is a recording about the presentation.
The recording is actually going to be put on the YouTube, but if you want, you can share your views on the paper. That is what we are going to do today. So
okay, in that case, what I will do is I will put the slideshow, and then I will be commenting on my paper.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as when you are ready, just let me know, and we will share the screen for you.
Okay. So, wait. Okay, once again, hello. So today I will be presenting on my paper titled Literature of the Coupeurs, specializing in Tourabali's Coupeurs d'Azur. So about this paper, it is very much important that we have an outlook on what is Mauritian literature first. So Mauritian literature has been very much the research interest of different international researchers, namely Julia Waters in analyzing the fictions of belonging of Mauritian novels, and also Françoise Lyonnais in her work Writing Women and Critical Dialogues, whereby she offers insight on contemporary multilingual dialogues about world literature. So as we can see, Mauritian literature is very much present in the international pedestal. And when we come to Mauritian literature, there is also an association of indentureship in some of the Mauritian texts. So with reference to Karl Tourabali's Coupeurs d'Azur, I posit that indentureship in Mauritian literature is very much prevalent. So what about Karl Tourabali's Coupeurs d'Azur? It is very much owing to the particularity of poetizing the coupeurs, which is the female indentured laborers, wherein he places...
sorry, Anisha, we cannot see your screen. Have you started sharing?
Yes, yes. Oh, sorry about this. So I was talking about Coupeurs d'Azur, how in Coupeurs d'Azur, Karl Tourabali places the female indentured as at the epicenter of the indentureship experiences. And in my paper, I have tried to contribute to Mauritian literature of indentureship with a special emphasis on female indentured laborers in order to contribute to the existing research. So about this paper, it tries to attempt to provide a considerable emphasis on the female indentured laborers. That is the female cane cutter of the blue sky. But it is also noted that in Coupeurs d'Azur, there is kind of a lot of memories that are very much commonly known by Mauritian indentured history. But the focus of Coupeurs d'Azur bears the agenda of prioritizing the space of one female indentured laborer as representative of the collective female indentured during indentureship periods. So with the focus on the space of the female indentured laborer in Coupeurs d'Azur, there is a certain commitment with the thoughts of a fictional female indentured to reach the level of representational space of the latter. Within this space, which is the Coupeurs predicament in indentureship, only an autobiography presentation of an I persona would have made the poetry of Coupeurs d'Azur nostalgic on things and events specific to the latter. So Mauritius is known as Mirich Desh by the Coupeurs, and this requires a look back in the history of the Coupeurs as Rose perdue des poèmes, which means lost rows of poems, an attribution given to the female indentured laborer. And it is very much important to note that when allusion is made to the lost rows of poems, there is also the idea of the Coupeurs experiencing Mauritius as a fantasy, very much promising of gold, which nevertheless materializes in a series of her bodily metaphors of fingers and eyes in depiction of her space, in memory of the sea and Mauritius. So about the methodology of my paper. So this paper explores Kalturabali's coupeuse d'azur from the theoretical lenses of space as theorized by Hever to support the spatializing practices of the coupeuse. So what is spatializing practices? It is defined as representation and signification, which is an essential constituent of the construction of space. So this theoretical construction of space unfolds within the phenomenological thinking of history, which is the approach this paper uses to evoke the construction of space by the coupeuse. While using this approach of phenomenology as a qualitative one in this paper, also allows us the conceptualization of the flow of experience of the coupeuse as she creatively engages with the space in the verses. Hever's spatializing practices using the approach of phenomenology generates interpretation on the space of the coupeuse thoughts, which is historically from the indentured period. The phenomenology approach used for this paper provides the historical context of the coupeuse engagement with space. So there has been quite a number of questions that have popped up in my mind, namely, when Couturabali associates the coupeuse with azure in the title of his poetry, what exactly is he referring to? What does the coupeuse of the blue sky has to do with the space of the sky, field, and sea? What is the underlying message behind the space of the blue sky, sea, and field with the thoughts of the coupeuse? What is the space for the coupeuse thoughts, or what spatializing practices does she attribute to her thoughts? What specific thoughts of the coupeuse are conveyed to the readers, and what is Tourabali's poetic vision of the coupeuse body with space? Does the coupeuse body offer a possibility for space dislocation points? Attempting to answer all these questions, I posit that Kalturabali's coupeuse d'azur, besides portraying the stark reality of the dark waters and sugarcane field as only description, the coupeuse journeys her space from bodily metaphors through her body and back to her body to depict her hardship in the sea and in Mauritius. In other words, coupeuse d'azur from a space perspective define the coupeuse and the process through which she undergoes to become all that she has become, that is, a female indentured. Her body defines her space in Mauritius, and the process in which her space is defined as what is argued to be her spatializing practices. Her space is only her body, while her spatializing practices are what her body relates to, that is the sky, sea, and field. So coming back to the poetry of coupeuse indentureship, Kalturabali's coupeuse d'azur makes the expression dance to someone's tune manifest in the verses iterated by the coupeuse. Dancers with sharp fingers, my translation. And I knew that the morning song would be merciless. Again, my translation of the French version. The verses sung by the coupeuse reveals the complex discourse of indentureship, which is rhythmically sung as revelation of her indentured state, reducing her as a puppet dancing to indentureship tune. The poetry takes the shape of a merciless song imposed by the blue sky on the coupeuse, and she is condemned to dance to the tune of the morning song, with her sharp fingers now resembling the sickle she uses as she cuts the sugarcane in the field. The verses carry philosophical meanings that shows how the coupeuse metaphorically relates with the space she is, that is the sea, as the umbilical cord she cuts to describe that she is born, as she cuts the sugarcane with her sharp fingers, cutting the cane to live. Despite the apparent difference between the coupeuse and the environment she is living, the elements of nature, the sea, the sky, and the field, all the distinct in form, seems to summon the coupeuse to dance to the tunes of the morning sun. The physical place of the coupeuse becomes the rhythm in which she dances. Like her teary eyes always sees the horizon green, her eyesight does not go beyond the green field. The point that the coupeuse makes here is that she is the performer of the song, and the physical place of the sky and field are subtly interrelated with each other, thus establishing the space of the coupeuse in relation to the sky over the field. The poetry of Coupeuse d'Azur makes possible the interpretation of the sky over the field as the space in which the coupeuse dances to the tunes of the morning song of indentureship, hence constituting a space-making activity that belongs to the imagination of the poetic vision of Tourabali. So about the spatializing of the coupeuse itself, as opposed to the sky over the field of the coupeuse, which is the reality of the reasons for her teary eyes, her action of cutting the sugarcane becomes the moves towards engaging herself in traveling, despite being confined to the sky of the field. The space of the field provides the interconnection between her thoughts about her fingers and eyes. And I cut and cut till the end of the world. My translation of the verses in Coupeuse d'Azur. Through her thoughts, she locates and dislocates her space, the field being the location of the green field, while the dislocation of the field would be a traveling female cane cutter who thinks the load of work she has is similar to traveling till the end of the world when she cuts the sugarcane. Such travel of her cutting endeavor is characterized as remnant of the various representation of space that the sky over the field offers to her. The coupeuse engages in attributing imaginary travels to the field, at times comparing it with the green horizon, and at times to the ship of a coolie. Either way, the imaginary travels of the coupeuse are enabled through her fingers cutting the green horizon, or her eyes seeing the field as the ship. The field becomes the locus of traveling the past, when she contemplates the sea, the nexus of her suffering, when she cuts the cane, and the foresight of the future, when she sees the horizon green. There is also an exaggerated irony in the title of Coupeuse d'Azur. The title shows the impossible, that is, the coupeuse cutting the blue sky, with the opening verses on, I quote, "They are always here under the blue sky." My translation, allusion to the space she inhabits confines her to an open space prison, wherein the cane becomes symbolic of her being under surveillance, ordering her to silence her thoughts of marvelous memories. Everywhere the cane has reduced to silence the thought of my marvelous stories. My translation, the space of the field with the sugarcane restricts her thoughts of rebellion, except when reference to the rebel female indenture Angele Coupen is made. But even then the field restricts the coupeuse with the verse of the morning song of indenture. So in the Tourabali's Coupeuse d'Azur, the body of the coupeuse is continuously associated with the field environment she is in, unleashing the space of indentureship as her body space measure of her thoughts when she is cutting the sugarcane. Her body space becomes synonymous of locating her space of indentureship that the sky over the field offers to her, and the contemplation of the sea in the field dislocates her by allowing her thoughts to imagine the space her body can be. The sea in the field dislocates her thoughts to imagine the space her body can be. And how is that so? Is when the body space of the coupeuse undergoes dissection, as the morning song of indenture is sung daily to her, attributing fingers to cane cutting, eyes to green horizons and blue sky. Tourabali uses the body space of the coupeurs in pieces to explain how the common metaphors of indentureship, that is, sky over field and sea, are infused in her actions and thoughts of cutting the sugarcane. The fingers and eyes of the coupeurs is the measure of the suffering and hardship of being a female indenture. Dancing to the tunes of indenture is but the ordeal of her body that impede any hope and aspiration of stopping the tune from playing. Her eyes see the field, but all she can do is see the field as the coolie ship, for the sameness of indentured plight in both field and sea is inflicted upon her. By putting the coupeurs as the I persona of his text, Tourabali has voiced the silence of the female indentured in poetic forms, of bodily metaphors of fingers and eyes, dancing in suffering under the blue sky of the green field. To conclude, Karl Tourabali's poetic vision of the coupeurs can be summarized in Hever's term specializing practices. It is as interpretative as the body metaphors of the coupeurs that informs the signification that the sea and sky over the sugarcane field have on her. It is motion literature of indentureship, with reference to the historical indentureship in Mauritius, which underpins the narration of the verses in the poetry. It is a poetic narration of the space in which the coupeurs inhabits and how she makes sense of that space through her bodily metaphors of fingers and eyes. For Tourabali, like any other Mauritian writers writing on indentureship, the space in which the indentured inhabits is a hostile one, with her bodily metaphors going along the tune of hostility as she cuts the sugarcane with her sharp fingers. The apparent particularity of Tourabali's poetry is that the story of the coupeurs is sung in remembrance of her rose lost in poems, very much her state when she makes sense of metaphors of the sky, field, and sea space through her body metaphors. Her fingers and eyes seem to lose in the process of cutting the sugarcane as she remembers the parcours of the sea and the ordeal of the sky in the field. This is what Heber refers as specializing practices, resulting from the interpretative analysis of a represented context, which in the Cooper's case is her body space in relation to her contemplation of the sea, sky, and field itself. Therefore, the specializing practices of the Coopers are one of relation that resumes in all of this field is like a coolie ship. My translation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anisha. And I definitely would say that everyone who has who has seen cane fields, who has actually been the third generation of the Girmitia, would actually recall the kind of writing and the kind of experiences that you have shared here. Definitely the morning songs, sea, sky, green horizons, fingers cutting the cane. Those are commonality that we find in all Girmitia communities because we had something in common, which was the reason why our forefathers were brought to any of these countries. Sugarcane was one of those. Excellent presentation, and we look forward to more questions and discussions at the end. The next presentation that we have is going to be by Dawosing Jayganesh, again from Mauritius. And Dawosing is going to share with us his presentation on, let's get back to you. His presentation is looking at the collective memory of the diasporic communities through Bhojpuri video songs. And we look forward to that. Thank you. All yours.
Yes. Allow me to share the screen. Hello friends, I'm Jayganesh from the Department of Bhojpuri Folk and Oral Traditions at the Mahatma Gandhi Institute, Mauritius. So my paper mainly consists of an analysis of free Bhojpuri songs in connection to the Girmitya consciousness. The choice of these free songs was done based on a purposeful sampling used in qualitative research of the Girmitya songs. The challenge of this purposeful sampling was in choosing the sample songs, but based on the criteria of a common Girmitya history as well as for rich Girmitya hostlands in comparison to their motherland India. One video from Mauritius, Suriname, and Fiji was selected. The paper engages in a comparative study of the free Girmitya songs while firmly rooting itself in delineating the dual theoretical framework, that is the border theory and cultural imaginary theory, to articulate the Girmitya consciousness in an expressive and reflective manner. So the first song, Calcutta Se Chutal Dahaj, in the 19th century, the great majority of indentured laborers immigrating from Bihar and Uttar Pradesh to work on the sugar plantations embarked at Bhawanipur, the Calcutta depot of Mauritius. The song's Calcutta Se Chutal Dahaj depicts the agony during the unending voyage to an unknown world, which fate had chosen as their new home. Leaving behind their beloved ones and their country, their hope of seeing their motherland gone forever. The song deals with the state of mind of indentured laborers traveling mostly probably for the first time in their life to such a long distance. The second song, released in 2007, Girmitya Kantrati, is another video animation featuring Raj Mohan in the attire of an indentured laborer. And the video has a cartoony story of the Girmityas in Suriname. It is a Champaran Turkish production. The song languishingly narrates the story of the Girmityas who traveled from India to Suriname, tracing the ordeal faced in the ship transporting them, along with the Girmityas' life they led in Suriname. The third song, Fiji Bidesha song. This Fiji Bidesha was sung by Ranpur Singh in 2010, written by late Master Santa Prasad Bahadur Karokare, India scored Lekutu Bua, Fiji Islands in 1961. The song depicts the saga of a typical Indian villager who left his country in search of a better living condition in a foreign island. It is about the worries of a female lover who is asking to her lover about his whereabouts, who has left her to go to Fiji Island, where it is believed to be a rich place. Like other Indians, he has been fooled and embarked in the ship to work. The journey lasted for many days and months. It is estimated to have taken them 73 days. Finally, the ship reached its destination, Fiji Island. Only after having completed the 5 years, I per the contract, that he will be able to go back to his beloved in India. He toiled in the rains and slept in the cold and has undertaken many hardships. The master would call him Coolie, that is the carrier, the one who would carry the luggage of the white man on his head. He is also the cultivator of the sugarcane in the field, and the mill is producing sugar as smoke is coming out of the chimney. So let's now analyze the video presentations of the three Bhojpuri songs. I will leave you with the songs.
कलकत्ता से छूटल दहाज भंवरवा धीरे चल खोज जे निकलल नया संसार भंवरवा धीरे चलल भवानीपुर दीपों से साथ में लेके गिरमिटिया भैल दहाजेक काल कोठरी दंग भये सब गिरमिटिया बाप कहीं तबाई कहीं बाप कहीं तबाई कहीं विधना चाल चलल भैया कवन नगरिया जाई के रुकी है कवन नगरिया जाई के रुकी है कौन खबरिया नहीं भैया अब मालिक रखी है हमर लाज भंवरवा धीरे चला कलकत्ता से छूटल जहाज भंवरवा धीरे चला।
सात समुंदर पार कराई के एक नवा देश के सपना दिखाई के कैसे हमके उभर माई के ले गए दूर सरनाम बताई के सात समुंदर पार कराई के कपड़ा लत्ता खर्चा गहिना गठरी में बान के सब आशा कृपा श्री राम के मुट्ठी में दूसर के सहारा पानी पे कभी दिल घबराए थोड़ा पछताए साय तब जाए के दिन बढ़िया आए 2-3 महीना जहाज पे रिश्ता नाता तो बन ही जाए कंत्राक जोगाई के थैली में एक एक विचार दिमाग में आए देश में कई सन लोग भेटाए खेती बाड़ी बढ़िया सैराए 5 बरिस कस के कमाई के लौटब गाँवपन पैसा जमाई के 7 समुंदर पार कराई के कुछ दिन सरनाम में रही के भाई धीरे धीरे आदत पड़ जाए अब इतना दिन मेहनत करके सब छोड़ छाड़ वापस के जाए जो बोले अब ही ये रह जाए सरकार के बल पे खेत मिल जाए 7 समुंदर पार कराई के एक नवा देश के सपना दिखाई के कैसे हमके उभर माई के ले गए दूर सरनाम बताई के 7 समुंदर पार कराई के
कोनी नगरिया में तोहरा बसेरवा हमरी गयल कब आवेंगे बटैया जिया के टपुआ रुपिया ही रुपिया हो बैठले जहाजवा में किस्मत विदेशिया दिनों दिन महीना पनिया ही पनिया हो पहुँचे गए फिजिया में भैया जहाजिया हो बारिश हो गर्मी पसीनवा हो खेतवा में गन्ना बोवाए रे फिरंगिया हो
Yes, Rajni ji, I am done. Yeah, so I'll better keep it for the discussion now.
Okay. Thank you very much for that interesting presentation on how the music and videos of it itself brings in a way all of us together where the diaspora or Indian diaspora is concerned for that. So this brings us to the end of this session because unfortunately we have apologies from Vijay Mishra and Nalini for their inability to participate in this presentation. So I would now call for any queries or any discussions anyone has. But one thing I would say that this was, I would say, the best session where we managed to collect views on a spectrum of things. We looked at what it was like to be a female cane cutter. We had a look at how a Gujarati tradesman assisted in abolishing slavery in another country. Then we are looking at how Bollywood was like a way to still retain that connection or an identity with the land that many had left behind. And finally, how music unites us in one form or the other. I would say this was the best way to have a look at the past, present, and possibly giving us a view on what the future would be like where the Indian diaspora is concerned. Because we have things which are giving us that identity. If it is not the language, it may be the way we dress, it may be the way we have our food culture. It may have, again, things like poetry, the literature that we read. If there is nothing else, then of course there is Bollywood, which still keeps us, in a way, getting that connection that there is still that Indianism in all of us, whether we like it or not, or maybe Dr. Yatin can also agree with me that normal India doesn't look at all like how it is portrayed in Bollywood or in the soap opera that we see on the TV series that we see on a daily basis. But definitely an interesting session, and I really enjoyed, and it kept me awake even though it is past midnight here. It kept me awake because it brought so many ideas that, yes, regardless of where we are, one of us, I'm from Fiji, Yatin is in India, we have Dr. Primnath in Trinidad, we had the two from Mauritius as well. So that is the Indian diasporic connection, and we could still understand, we could still relate to what anyone was talking about. That is the connection I think that we all share. And now I leave it upon all of you to just discuss and share what your view is. Yes, Dr. Yatin, go ahead.
Yes, just ma'am, I am recollecting the memory of my guru, what he used to say, Professor Eke Singh, who used to say, as you said, in one sense, all we are in the state of diaspora. You know, in one sense or other, we are all in the state of diaspora, whether we are in our own country or we are outside the country. So I want to add these in your views and your opinions. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Dawosing?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. I would like to comment for Dr. Primnath. Indeed, the Ramayan for Mauritians here has been the unifying factor, I would say, in diasporic countries. We can all identify ourselves with Bollywood as well. The songs Lata, Kishore, we are all, भले उनसे कौन परिचित नहीं है, we are all also the cultural sustenance he talked about is indeed very important, this linkage. So we all feel indeed that this borderless state of sharing this those common interests. So in Mauritius as well, we do have them. Maybe I would like to ask Dr. Gooptar about the songs I presented. Are you aware of any of them? The song. One was from Suriname and one from Trinidad, and how it is viewed there. Because the first one I presented was on Calcutta Se Chutal Jahat, very famous in Mauritius. So we can all recollect to the agonies which the ancestors undergone together. So maybe in Suriname or Fiji, the songs I shared, I would like to know if I'm sure Dr. Gooptar will.
Yes, Dr. Gooptar, would you like to share something about it?
Yeah, I can't say that I recall hearing the songs, but they sound familiar. But no, I don't recall. But I think one of them sounded familiar. The Surinamese one sounded familiar to me. But the other one, I wasn't quite aware of it. Although he said it's from Trinidad, I wasn't so sure that
yes,
you know. But the thing is that I take his point that we are in a borderless state, which is what the point I was making, and that we are all in a borderless state, and regardless of whether we go back to the classical mode of singing, whether we go back to the folk singing, or whatever it is, we are all linked together in some form or some way or the other. My specific thing, though, was that Bollywood takes the cake. Bollywood links us and its spin-offs, all spin-offs, particularly the soaps. And when I was in Mauritius, you know, I interviewed a number of people, and the soaps were very, very, very popular. One guy told me, he says, my wife started to look at it. We have one television, and I had to sit down and watch it. And then I became more intrigued by it than my wife. I had to call her every time the show was ready to start. Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? The show's about to start. You know, so he became more taken up with the show than his wife, and that was a normal thing I picked up in most of the diaspora areas, particularly with these soaps. I call them Bollywood soaps because that's what they are. They're what you call flavored with all the Bollywood things that you would find in Bollywood, except that, you know, like my wife tells me, she said, do these people actually go to sleep with all their clothes on like that? Do they leave their doors open like that? You know, you know, do they leave their doors open like that so that someone passing could? I said, well, that's part of the make-believe kind of thing in Bollywood, you know. But putting all of that aside, the fact remains that we are part of the Gurmitias, and I really want to compliment the Gurmita Institute, the Global Gurmit Institute, for organizing this conference. We here in Trinidad, through the NCIC, we have been organizing conferences like these also for a number of years. And it's because of these kind of global conferences that we are able to share and understand a lot more about what we've heard. So I'm sure, Jay, I would go and try to find the songs that you played. I'm going to try to find them and look at them. But there was one that was created, what you call a diaspora song that was created with a lot of singers. I think it was a Mauritian attempt or Fijian attempt. And we had a number of people from Trinidad, Guyana, Suriname, Fiji, Mauritius, It's on YouTube. It's a beautiful song that really talks about the diaspora Indians and the descendants of the Indian immigrants.
Good. I would like you to share that with me.
Yeah, there's a beautiful one.
Thank you, sir.
Actually, in our 2020 conference last year, we
Mhm.
made that our theme song for the conference last year. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's a beautiful song also.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Yes, so we in Fiji too, we always have some type of, we have the Lok gift. We also have the Bhojpuri songs that have actually shared what the Girmitiya life was like. And we have a collection of such. But when we had the session, as soon as you started playing those songs, what came to my mind, and I think Dr. Primnath would agree or remember Sundar Popo.
Yes, Sundar Popo, yeah.
That was one singer who actually made quite a lot of people in Fiji realize that in other countries too, they were singing like the way we had those music in Fiji, because for someone like I was very young when the Sundar Popo song started being played in Fiji, and we would say, so in another country too, they sing like this. They also use things like Teraiya or chutney or those types of technology, which we thought it was just a very Fiji thing.
And that's because their origins. That's because their origins are basically the same.
Yeah.
They came from the same, and they remember the same kind of songs. I spoke to some of the older people, and they sang some songs to me that that they remembered their mother singing to them early, that came from India, and those are the same songs that Sundar Popo took and created his with English lyrics and so on. And I'm sure you're familiar with the chutney phenomenon in Trinidad, and what they actually took the filmy lyrics, the filmy songs. When Ravi B sings "Rum kill me mara, rum kill me mora, rum kill me fara, rum kill me whole family, akela hume." So he actually took the song and put English lyrics to it and create. So that was a spin-off from Sundar Popo. Sundar Popo was the one who started off that trend, and these guys actually took it up and built. But again, that's Bollywood identity too for them, because they were keeping the Bollywood identity with the song and using English words, but the identity thing was still there, you know.
Yes, so we definitely have that. And the other thing I would also like to share is that in the diaspora study here, we have actually discussed the first and the second wave diaspora movement as well. And that is where I would share something very similar to what Dr. Yatinkumar has shared. Because in Fiji, we had the Girmit wave. And then when that ended, we had the free migrants who also came. And the free migrants that came to Fiji were made up of the Gujaratis and the Punjabis. And these were the ones who started the business in Fiji. And I come from a mixed family background where my father is from Bihar and my mother's family is from Gujarat. And then you can see how, even though Girmit had ended, how those early years, the 1920s, 1930s, were even then, even beyond Girmit era, was a difficult time for those Indians who were trying to make a living for themselves. And then you can see how the Gujarati business people struggled to have a roof over their head, how the struggles were of the women who were brought, who didn't know the language in most cases, how they struggled, and how I've seen my grandmother rolling papad, how they would make chutney, how would they sell achar, how would they be taking food for the family members who were in the shop, and how the Punjabi Sardars would be carrying the ware on their head, traveling from one village to the other, selling their goods. So even though we share what we have heard of humanology in the Mauritius female cane cutters, that has remained in many of the first wave Gurmit writing. But when we talk about the beyond the Gurmit era, the second wave, we still find the struggles. We still find the difficulties that the Indians faced when all the colonial benefits ended. And one of those was like education and medical benefits. Because as soon as you were away from the contract, you had to fend for yourself. And this is where the Indians in, I think, all the countries that we come from helped in setting up the education system. And the identity was, it is seen, though we have got rid of the names that we have for most of the schools in Fiji, but most of the best schools were set up by the Indians who remained, who stayed behind. And again, music, the religious beliefs and the rituals we are following, we are going through the Navratri now. So all of those things were part of the identity that the Gurmitians brought, kept, and it's still with us. So again, language, our creative writing, the literature in the various forms. I think this was an excellent session. Is there anything else anyone wants to add?
Thank you for sharing, Rajni. It was a pleasure discussing with Dr. Primnath, Yatinji, my friend Anisha, and yourself. So thank you. And we are getting ready here in Mauritius in 30 minutes. We are going to Navratri. We are having the sessions, daily prayers we will just mention. So in Mauritius, here it is 20 to 6. So after 6, everyone will be attending temple, the satsang. And so thank you. It has been a nice session. Thank you for sharing. Thank you, all friends.
Thank you very much, ma'am, and happy Navratri to all. Happy Navratri, ma'am. Sorry, I should wish you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And stay safe. In Fiji, we still have COVID, so we are still following strict restrictions and curfews. So again, the Navratri Puja has been reduced to, I think, 20 or 30, but we are over the second wave, and fingers crossed we will get over it.
Yeah.
So all the best. Happy Navratri to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you.
It was a
Thank you very
pleasure.
much. You have been a
being this
wonderful
session.
host.
Thank you.
Okay, Rajni.